Internal Revenue Service IRS tax news. Tax day for individuals extended to May 17th. Treasury. IRS extend filing and payment deadline. IR 2021-59, March 17, 2021, Washington. The Treasury Department and Internal Revenue Service announced today that the federal income tax filing due date for individuals for 2020 tax year will be automatically extended from April 15th to 2021, April 15th, 2021 to May 17th, 2021. The IRS will be providing formal guidance in the coming days. This is similar for what we saw for the 2019 tax year requirements that were then extended in 2020. So let's just kind of recap what's going on here. We got the individual tax return due dates for 2020 typically being due by April 15th. Now, normally you can go on extension from that till October 15th, but there's a difference between the extension of the filing requirements and the payment requirements. So whenever you're thinking about these type of deadlines, you want to keep two things in mind. Those two things not always going together. One, you've got the requirements for the payments. Typically, the IRS wants the payments to be happening as the year goes. Therefore, the tax payments for 2020, they want to be happening in 2020, typically for W-2 employees, that being done by it taking them out of the W-2 wages. And then there's the filing requirement, and typically the IRS wants that by April 15th of the following year, in this case 2021 normally. Those are the two things we're talking about. And then normally you can go on extension, so that would extend the filing requirements, although you'd still want to be up to date on the payments and keeping those two things separate in the mind. So now they've extended the due dates here. It looks for like both a payment due date as well as the filing requirements for May 17th, 2021. Once again, you still want to be careful in terms of what are going to be the requirements for the payments, because the IRS will typically want that to have been done during 2020. So we'll hopefully get into that in a little bit more detail as we go here. So the IRS will be providing formal guidance in the coming days. Quote, "This continues to be a tough time for many people, and the IRS wants to continue to do everything possible to help taxpayers navigate the unusual circumstances related to the pandemic while also working on important tax administration responsibilities," end quote. So that's what I was thinking here. Obviously, they want to extend for individual reasons, and that will hopefully allow individuals more time to comply with whatever the regulations are going to be with the tax code, with the compliance of the filing. But obviously, the IRS has a lot of pressure on them as well at this point in time, with these economic impact payments and other kind of legislation that has been going through for purposes of the pandemic and whatnot. So this was said by the IRS Commissioner Chuck Rettig. Quote, "Even with the new deadline, we urge taxpayers to consider filing as soon as possible, especially those who are owed refunds. Filing electronically with direct deposit is the quickest way to get refunds, and it can help some taxpayers more quickly receive any remaining stimulus payments they may be entitled to." So although they extend the deadline, if you're getting a refund, then you're typically going to have an incentive to file earlier anyway. And if you had any problems with your economic impact payments round 1 and round 2 that happened in 2020, then the remedy for that is the recovery rebate credit. So that is available to people. So once again, if you're getting a refund, then you typically want to file. If you're not getting a refund and you owe money, then your major objective is to file. In filing, your major objective to file is typically to not be penalized by the IRS for late filing and then to be paying on time. So if you owe money, you're considering how can I lower the penalties to not have any penalties, both with regards to filing penalties and payment penalties. If they owe you money, then extending it just extends how much time they're gonna pay us, the taxpayer, and they actually don't mind extensions in that case for the most part, because that means they get to hold on to the money longer. So bottom line, if you're expecting a refund, you probably still want to file. You probably want to do it electronically. You probably want to do it with a direct payment option, so that it gets processed as soon as possible and you get the refund as soon as possible. If you owe money, then you want to make sure that you're in compliance to the extent that you can be to reduce penalties, including the payment deadline penalties for the tax filing as well as the payment deadlines. And this could be some relief in that situation. So individual taxpayers can also postpone federal income tax payments for the 2020 tax year due on April 15, 2021 to May 17, 2021 without penalties and interest, regardless of the amount owed. So again, typically in terms of the payment side of things, which we're keeping separate from the filing requirement side of things, the IRS wants their money in the year that the tax year is, which would be 2020. Normally that is done by them taking the money or having your employer take the money directly out of your paycheck. But if you make estimated tax payments, possibly because you have a Schedule C sole proprietor business, or you have some other type of income with no withholdings, like a retirement income or something like that, and you make quarterly payments, that last quarterly payment that you would be making, you'd still need to pay during the year in quarters generally, would be the normal rule. That last payment isn't going to be due typically until the following year. Even though it's a 2020 payment, it wouldn't be due until April 15, 2021. So that is the deadline that they're basically extending. So don't get that confused with basically all payments. The IRS still wants, most of the money during the year. So you want to make sure that you're in compliance to the degree that you can be, once again, if you owe money, to owe as little money as possible, including money related to penalties and interest for payments and money related to penalties and interest for filing requirements. So the postponement applies to individual taxpayers, including individuals who pay self-employment tax. Penalties, interest, and additions to tax will begin to accrue on any remaining unpaid balances as of May 17, 2021. Individual taxpayers will automatically avoid interest and penalties on the taxes paid by May 17th. Individual taxpayers do not need to file any forms or call the IRS to qualify for this automatic federal tax filing and payment relief. So unlike a normal type of extension, which typically extends the due date, this is just an extension automatically. There's nothing you need to do. You don't need to file an extension for this to happen. And presumably, we would still have the availability to file for an extension under the normal kind of conditions up to this due date, which would extend out normally till October 16th. So that may still be an option, but you don't have to really opt into that until that point in time, remembering once again that if you do file an extension at that point in time, there is a difference between the filing requirements and the payment requirements. So individual taxpayers who need additional time to file beyond the May 17th deadline can request a filing extension until October 15th by filing Form 4868. There's a link to Form 4868 here through their tax professional, tax software, or using the free file link on irs.gov. Remember that you do have that free file link, so you may be able to do that to file the extension if you need that as well. That's a link to third-party type of software, which typically provides free software providing for tax preparation for individuals that qualify with an AGI limitation and so on. Filing Form 4868 gives taxpayers until October 15th to file their 2020 tax return, but does not grant an extension of time to pay taxes due. So once again, remember, if you're filing the extension, then you have until October 15th to avoid penalties and interest, hopefully for the filing of the taxes, but still need to be paying the taxes that are due, which can be difficult considering the fact that probably the reason you're filing the extension is because you don't know how much taxes are due. But, you have to estimate and make the payment in some way to avoid penalties and interest on it. So taxpayers should pay their federal income tax due by May 17, 2021 to avoid interest and penalties. The IRS urges taxpayers who are due a refund to file as soon as possible. Most tax refunds associated with e-file returns are issued within 21 days. Now that is an average, but if you file electronically and you get an electronic payment, meaning you give them your bank information so they can electronically deposit the information, they're talking average 21 days here. So this relief does not apply to estimated tax payments that are due on April 15, 2021. These payments are still due on April 15th. So that's kind of a little bit unusual. So they extended the 2020 deadline for the fourth quarter of 2020, it looks like to me. This is my interpretation of it. But the tax payments for 2021, first payment still due in the first quarter, that would be April 15th. So in other words, if you're a W-2 employee and your money's being taken directly out of your paycheck, then you're probably fine because they're taking the money directly out of the paycheck. If you have a Schedule C sole proprietor type of business, or for some other reason, need to make quarterly payments, then the fourth quarter payment for 2020 may be extended here without penalties and interest. However, the first quarter payment for 2021 looks like it's still due on the normal time period, which would be the month after the first quarter, April 15th, 2021. A little bit unusual because you may not know what that payment is until you file the tax return and estimate what that payment will be. And you're not going to file the tax return for the extended due date, so a little confusing, but that's what it is. So you got to make your best guess and make that first quarter payment for 2021, even though you might be extending the 2020 fourth quarter payment. So these payments are still due on April 15th. Taxes must be paid as taxpayers earn or receive income during the year, either through withholding or estimated tax payments. In general, estimated tax payments are made quarterly to the IRS by people whose income isn't subject to income tax withholding, including self-employment income, interest, dividends, alimony, or rental income. Most taxpayers automatically have their taxes withheld from their paycheck and submitted to the IRS by their employers. So whenever possible, the IRS obviously takes your money without you knowing about it. But if they can't do that, you got to do the quarterly estimated payments, and that's when these kind of deadlines and these rules come into play. So state tax returns, the federal tax filing deadline postponement to May 17, 2021 only applies to individual federal income tax return and tax, including tax on self-employment income, payments otherwise due April 15, 2021, not state tax payments or deposits or payments of any other type of federal tax. So they're being specific in terms of the taxes that are applying here. So know that any other kind of deadline that you might have for taxes, you want to know which deadline you're talking about and whether or not they be extended or not. We're talking about individual income taxes for Fed here. We're not talking about state because this is from the IRS. You're going to have to talk to the state for any kind of state relief that you might have, and that will, of course, vary from state to state. So taxpayers also will need to file income tax returns in 42 states plus the District of Columbia. State filing and payment deadlines vary and are not always the same as the federal filing deadline. The IRS urges taxpayers to check with their state tax agencies for those details. There's a link to the state tax agencies here. Winter storm disaster relief for Louisiana, Oklahoma, and Texas. Earlier this year, following the disaster declarations issued by the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, F-E-M-A, there's a link to them here, the IRS announced relief for victims of February winter storms in Texas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana. These states have until June 15, 2021 to file various individual and business tax returns and make tax payments. This extension to May 17th does not affect the June deadline. So due to the emergency situation under the FEMA declaration and so on, there was already an extension that was in place there, and this extension is not going to have any impact on the extensions that were already in place, it looks like, from that situation. So for more information about this disaster relief, visit the disaster relief page on irs.gov. There's a link to that disaster relief page here, and there'll be a link to this in the description.